Education reform is the name given to a political process in which the goal is to improve public education. In Plato's The Republic, he stated that compulsory learning never sticks in the mind. Public education began in the intellectual era of enlightenment. Today, many organizations struggle to transform education to meet the needs of the increasingly competitive global economy. In this discussion, we will examine education reform and how improving the public and private education sectors is absolutely necessary to our increasingly globalized society. Remember to subscribe and comment your own proper views about this important topic. Thank you very much for watching.
Good morning and welcome to Mundane Politics. This morning with me I have Rajan Anderson, Lane Carter, Wes Thompson, and Garrison McCleary. We will be talking today about educational reform. So I would like to start off this debate on asking what your thoughts are on providing a private tutor for each student. Who would like to begin? Garrison, what are your thoughts?
I think providing some educational assistance to students is something that could benefit students. I think that it definitely has a role to play in a school. I think that the costs of employing these people would run a high deficit for the government and for educational institutions. So I think to listen to the rest of the debaters here, it might give me a little bit more of an insight into that kind of situation.
I think Garrison makes a really good point that hiring private tutors, obviously for everyone, is going to be an enormous cost. So there's an interesting video about something called Digital Aristotle, and it basically says that the internet could provide that private tutoring based on like different factors that it takes into account, and basically tutors the student on its own. Now that being said, I realize the importance of group work in learning, because if we just had private tutors, just did Digital Aristotle, as the video presenter makes a point of saying that will replace education, I think that shouldn't be the main focus of education, but as a tutor, it's a good thing. But education should be focused on group work.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, within schools, obviously collaboration is key, and I think that is actually, if anything, one of the main things that you learn in school, how you collaborate with others. And idealistically, while we would hope that we could have private tutors for everybody, it's just fiscally, there's no possible way of that actually being able to happen.
And just to continue on to the Digital Aristotle point that was made, I think that should be a supplement to teaching teachers. I think that should be an aid so that it can give students their basic knowledge, like their times tables and basic math and English knowledge. But I feel as though there is a component that's missing from the computers programs right now. Maybe it will be implemented in the future. But I feel as if there is only so much algorithms kind of can accomplish, and I feel that having a teacher there to understand what difficulties you're going through and help you step by step, that's kind of key. So I feel that the issue, what we have to figure out is how this can be economically feasible, and so I feel as if we supplement education online with actual teachers, this could be made possible.
I agree with you, but I think that really it's not the one-on-one thing, that the things that cannot be replaced between teacher and students. It's the collaborative dynamics at school that the teacher helps to facilitate. So I think there should be a movement away from all this standardized testing, this curriculum, and more specialized education and more group focused, which is what you have to do in the real world. Collaborate with people, and that's how things get done.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the collaboration aspect. I just meant to say that when there is, it's not going to be all collaboration. So when there is some individual work, like there are some individual basic kind of fundamentals, I think that you have to have under your belt before you can collaborate with a group of people is what the teacher could help with. But I agree with the collaboration, that it should be much more emphasized than, there's this whole thing where it's there's only one, this is the right answer, there's the wrong answer, right or wrong. And I agree, standardized testing is just too one-sided. It's one perspective. It's one way of looking at something, and I just don't think that
I agree. I think standardized testing it's far too truncated, and it doesn't take into consideration how other people learn. You do assessments of whether you're like a kinesthetic learner, an auditory learner, but at the same time, I don't feel as though anything's really implemented to facilitate that type of testing that's done. I mean, I feel as though it's the same old. Despite trying to tailor to everyone's learning styles, yeah, it never actually happens. It's still the same mundane process of standardized testing.
Like smart boards and stuff. I mean, they say they're trying to implement all these different ways of getting the information across, but I feel as if it's like, what about the kinesthetic learners? They're not going to be,
It's a new way of doing the same thing.
The idea of standardized testing in the province of Ontario is not to look at the academics of a student, it's to look at how the academics are being taught to the students. So it's actually a reflection back onto the teachers. So you look and you go, okay, this school has a lower grade average than the schools elsewhere. What is going on in the school teaching-wise that these students aren't being able to reach this certain level of
But maybe those students excel at something
Correct.
that is not in the standardized test. Like, I mean, I think it's ridiculous that we say, okay, everyone has to meet these certain requirements, and if you don't, you're not smart. If you do, you are a smart school. And like, I think that's ridiculous.
Our notion of how we almost quantify intelligence, I would say it's based off that. It's based off just a standardized test, which there are people that are uniquely gifted in their own ways, academic in their own ways, but it is not reflected on that standardized test. And so then that school is labeled as like a lesser institute of academia.
And I would just like finish this.
My next question is, as we're on the topic of standardizing testing, what do you think are some other forms of assessment that we could use to measure the growth of students and how they learn and how we can make them or assist them in growing further in their education?
Well, I'd like to start this off, and I'd just like to say that there's this really great video. I think it's a TED video, and it's the guy talks about how students should be doing something more like in the real world, not like, oh, you need this trigonometry because when you go to college, oh, you're going to need to do this. And when in the real world, like after that, most people probably won't use trigonometry unless you're an engineer or something of the like. I think, and also like, why not learn for the sake of learning? Like I'm a pretty curious person, but in school, I personally found it very, very dull because it's like, I'd rather learn on my own because it's
not tailored towards the individual.
Yeah.
And this is one principle that I personally, I can't comprehend, is that in a Western culture that that capitalizes on just about anything and everything, for profit or for gain, how is it that we don't capitalize on kids and students their strengths? How is it that we force them to get this well-rounded education?
We're creating a society of jack of all trades and masters of none.
Exactly.
And I think that is not conducive to fostering educational growth. I mean, when you have students that excel at a certain thing, yes, I understand the need for them to have a basic, well-rounded education, but at the same time, let them pursue their endeavors and let them excel at what they excel at, as opposed to holding them back.
And if they don't excel at a certain thing, don't teach it in the same way that lets other students.
Exactly, you have to accommodate for them.
You were making a very interesting point about the kinesthetic, auditory, and visual learners that we test, and how we don't actually really do anything for that. Well, I like to just extend that and say, like, learning disabilities. Really what that is just saying someone learns differently from what
the norm is.
Yeah, the norm is. So basically, we don't have to drug these people. We don't have to say, oh, you just need to learn. We need to change the teaching style. Yeah.
Well, I think what we're talking about is we actually kind of need to have like an education renaissance, right? We need to.
Yeah.
I grew up on the idea that you have a buffet. Right? Your parents provide you with a buffet. Your institutions provide you with a buffet of things that you love. right? You have your education that you love. You might be a music person, you might be a math person, you might be a politics person. And you have all those options, and then you go and you pick which one you like the most. And you're going to keep on coming back, but you have to try every single one. And if we don't open that up to our students and our young people, then we're not going to be able to have that option where they'll find what they're good at.
And I feel like I feel as if, you know, it's easily seen that when a student is interested in a subject, is passionate about a subject, they're much more likely to succeed and to excel and to enjoy. It's a much more stimulating environment, and they're much more likely to stay in school and enjoy it. And so I feel if we focus on that, and maybe more like the Northern European kind of school system where, or the European school system where, you know, they'll have at a younger age, you decide what your interest is, whether it be arts or sciences and maths related, so you can go into kind of a field or an area that you know that you like and that you know that you will excel in.
I don't even think it's necessarily like narrowing down the subjects at an earlier age. It's just about identifying how people learn and then creating classrooms exclusively for those people. Like, I mean, it's not to say that, like, I'm not, it's sort of, I think it's ridiculous to say that, oh, people with dyslexia, oh, they're good at art, so we'll just make them all artists. Like, I think we give them an opportunity to do maths and sciences, and, like, to teach them that, but just teach it in a different way that makes sense to them. And
so if we are trying to provide a better accommodation for their students and their learning abilities, should we have smaller class sizes, or should we divide them into groups of the way that they learn? Or?
I'm glad that you asked that, because I think that one of the key things is, and this kind of ties in with the build or the action that's going, teacher action that's going on right now, is I think that too little emphasis is put on teachers, you know, on how important they are. And I feel as though we need to radically reform how teachers are being perceived and how they're being hired, because I feel as though we need to hire, if we had smaller class sizes, which I have been in larger and smaller do offer more attention, so it is more likely that you will succeed in those, I believe. But I feel as though we need to hire teachers, and they will go through a rigorous process. They should go through rigorous training and should be continually, you know, tested, like year after year, to make sure they are up to standard and they can be teaching the children, you know, to the best of their ability and using as many different techniques as they can. And I think with that, students can, you know, really benefit and flourish in process.
I agree. I would say that I think that the teaching designation as of right now doesn't have like the nobility that it really should have, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, teaching now, while you have people that aspire to be teachers, teaching now can also be something that you fall back on as a backup. Like, oh, I didn't get into what I wanted to do, so now I'll become a teacher. And it should not be like that at all. The teaching designation should be so noble that you have people striving for it. You have people fighting for it, wanting to be a teacher. We shouldn't have a lack of teachers. It should be so much more noble. I only think the way you can do that is honestly if we radically reform education by only having the very best of the best as teachers. And with that, I think that more compensation has to be given towards them.
So, I think that it's not about class sizes, it's not about, it is about the aspect of tailoring the education for the student, but it's the quality of education that the teachers are providing to the students. So it could be a 600-person class, like at university, but that professor is specialized. The professor wants to be there. The professor wants to enlighten students and fulfill the students, you know, their goals in life. And when you have someone like that, they're going to provide the best education to the students.
And
not
passionate about, I think the key thing, I mean, they have to be qualified, but I think above, as important as that is, I think that the teacher above all else must be totally, completely knowledgeable but passionate about their subject, because that, I think, more than anything comes through in their teaching, and I think that affects the students' learning 100%. You know?
Especially, I'd like to just return to the smaller class sizes. I think especially in primary and high schools, not so much post-secondary, because it's not feasible. But smaller class sizes in these institutions, I think that it could radically reform things like math, which
Oh,
in
yeah,
high
for sure.
school,
Yeah.
that is one of the most
The
boring
average killer.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm very good at math, but it is so boring in math class. It is. I don't really want to get into that. Anyway,
It's a sensitive
it needs to
subject.
be radically reformed so that you're working towards something instead of blindly copying.
I agree, because I
equations.
think smaller class sizes are conducive to tailoring education to the students. When you have a smaller class size, then you're more inclined to focus on the students and focus on what their needs are, as opposed to just standing in front of a board and just lecturing.
And I
And
feel
let's not just do basic math questions. Let's have a problem that we need to solve using math.
So you can see the real world application.
I mean, that's what I was gonna go into.
Like-
I feel like the most important thing, the most frustrating thing for students is the fact that they cannot see beyond the walls of this classroom. How is this ever going to be used? So if they take these principles that things that can be used in you know a real world application, then students get to see, okay, this can be applied, this has purpose, this has value, I want to learn this.
Because I believe that one of the primary reasons why people don't succeed in school, it's not because they're not intelligent enough, it's the fact of the application. They don't apply themselves because they don't see a need to apply
What is the
themselves.
point? What's
If
the
you
point?
show them the pragmatic application, I think there's more of a chance of them themselves actually applying in that classroom and thus achieving a higher degree of
I
success.
think this goes back to also what Rajan was saying at the beginning, is the want or the craving for knowledge, right?
Yeah.
For me, if I sit in a math class, yes, I want to know all of this about what's going on, you know, in society and how this applies to my life. But just knowing what calculus and vectors is
Yeah.
and things like that, I have this craving to want to know more and more
Yeah.
and more.
No
And we
one-
don't instill that in our
Yeah, it's
in our
just.
children.
I think what we really need to instill in our children is that look at calculus. It's amazing. Look at what we can do with numbers. Basically, is what I think math should.
And
That's
like
what should be
you
the
have
focus
you
of
have different
math.
classes, but it's the same process. You sit, you listen to the teacher, you take notes,
Same
you're
format.
tested on it. It's same format, just different subject matter. And I don't think that's conducive necessarily to helping kids learn.
And take, for example, the Khan Academy, which is online, and you know, you can tell that the man he's writing on a blackboard,
Just loves
and
educating
he
people.
loves educating. And you know, there's one thing he's like, well, if this doesn't blow your mind, like you have no soul. Or and if that's the kind of teachers that we want in our schools, and we want, I agree, 100%. We need to instill the love of education and the curiosity to learn. That should be something that we should totally instill in our students, in our children, rather than making it a tedious task, like eating your spinach. It's like, oh, I have to go to school.
It starts
It's
from a young age.
and it's
Early childhood education is where it needs to start. We need to start, instead of sitting down and doing the speed minute multiplication tables, we need to be teaching kids how to do it with Big Bird, or we need to be teaching them that way so that they enjoy it. They enjoy sitting down and doing the multiplication tables. They enjoy seeing the alphabet. You have to have that from a young age so that they continue with it.
Yeah.
And it's also instilled in people that
I'm
you have
actually
to.
just going to interrupt for a second. We're going to take a break and we'll be back with you shortly. We are back. So I would just like to thank you guys all again for being here. And I would like to ask you, do you believe that teachers should have higher salaries, or do you think they're good where they are right now?
I think one big thing about having teachers have higher salaries is if you provide it as an incentive. So if you say, if you do better and your students are achieving more, and they're like, as a student, maybe there needs to be some kind of survey that a student has to fill out with a parent, something like that. As an incentive, you would give that teacher more money.
I don't think you can do it as an incentive. Because I think that will foster like unethical behavior from the teachers.
Yeah.
Teachers would be more prone to have their students cheat just to receive a higher mark, so they receive higher compensation. I don't think necessarily that would work. I think that the higher salaries needs to be across the board, and that would only be if we can restore almost like a sense of honor for being a teacher, like the prestige of being a teacher. The money should follow that, but it shouldn't follow how well the students are doing, because I think that will foster unethical behavior.
I completely agree with you. I think that the incentive for teachers should be that they're contributing to society,
Exactly.
not that like the wealth is put upon them if they their students are doing better by some standard or something like that. That sounds. Now, going back to the original question, I think that in the future, teachers' salaries should be inflated because, or should be increased because I think we need to move towards a more in-depth education system. But right now, I think for what is happening with all the bad teachers out there, their salaries are frankly inflated.
I think that I actually agree with Garrison. I think that teachers' salaries, I don't know how this would be achieved without a certain degree of dishonesty coming into play with teachers trying to, artificially boost up their students' marks so that they would get more pay. But I think that salary, it should be more competitive. So for teachers, this would instill the whole aspect of, if you're a teacher, you want to be a teacher. You want to do the best that you can. And I feel that this would only add to it. So if you taught your students, your salary is dependent on how well you teach them and how well you can communicate to them. I feel that should be adjusted for subjects and grade levels, obviously, and whatnot. But I think that the salaries of teachers, not only that, but I feel that they should be in general raised. There should be a higher bar because, with a certain tax bracket, with a certain level of income comes a certain level of kind of inherent respect. I think that there's, if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor and you're making 100 grand, 200 grand a year, there's a reason why those professions are considered white collar, and that's largely to do with the income that they make, the salaries that they make. And so I feel people would take the profession of teaching more seriously if in general the salaries were raised. But again, I think it should be dependent on.
To an extent, I agree that salaries should be raised dependent on the subject material. Mm-hmm. Subject material, I'm in agreement with, because let's face facts. Teaching physics is far harder than teaching gym. I do think that salaries depend on the actual subject material, that could change. But again, just to I guess reiterate my point that I had mentioned earlier, I think that if you base it off and you gauge the salary based on how well the students are doing, all that will do is foster ethical behavior for teachers.
And Lane, you brought up an interesting point there. You said that it would encourage teachers to be competitive. Now, is that really what we want to impress on our students, that you have to always be competitive in life? I think we should enforce collaboration rather than competitiveness. And by giving teachers also, I am in complete agreement with Wes, because by how are we measuring the teacher's success? I mean, it just seems there's too much of a possibility for students. For example, in grade 6, my teacher really wanted us to do well on the EQAO exam. So we had all these different sheets and stuff. But really, we did well. But really, did we gain any much more out of it than another class that didn't?
No, she said it was reflective of her and her teaching capabilities. It was selfish, rather, I would say.
Yeah.
Let me just be clear. I think that we should, of course, we should stress collaboration. That is what 90% of the jobs in the workforce, maybe almost all jobs in the workforce, depend on, to a certain level, on collaboration. But I think another aspect that we need to embrace wholeheartedly, if we're going to be competing, if this generation of students that's coming forward and future generations, is the competitiveness. As much as it is important for a love of learning, curiosity of learning, there needs to be a level of competitiveness, because just too often students just sit back and just ride along and don't do anything in school. And I think if there is a level of competitiveness, if that's ingrained in the program, I feel that would do nothing but drive students forward too.
To an extent, I agree with that, because I mean, we have to stop diluting our students into this notion that we can all win, because that's just not true. Yeah. There are people that will be better. There are people that will be more successful in terms of how you measure success. That is an inevitability, and I say we tailor too much to this notion that like we can all win, but you cannot. And so I can understand Lane's point that, you know, we do have to show that, you know, with hard work you can be rewarded and that you will, in a sense, be better. I don't want to necessarily foster this notion that like just because you're more of an academic, you're better. But at the same time, we do have to come to the realization that the workforce is competitive, and you need to have that competitiveness here in school.
I'd like to clarify my earlier point. I didn't mean eliminating competitiveness, but having individual teachers compete against one another, I don't think is the right way.
I agree with that.
Competitive collaboration rather than individual competitiveness. And also, I think that schools should tailor a bit more to making students happier people with their lives, not, grow up and become a successful lawyer and make lots of money. I think it should be tailored, okay, what do you think what would make you happy in life, rather than what would make you powerful, successful.
I think that's what being
There's a huge thing that if we look at the world today, we have other nations, Canada, the United States, and most of Europe have been at the top in education for hundreds of years. Okay? Now we have other countries like Japan, China, India that are starting to raise their education levels, and they're starting to be competitive in the world market. So they're bringing in more innovative ideas. They're creating an industry just based on innovation. And Canada, as we slowly, our education drops, we're dropping on an international margin, that we're losing that innovation, which will then subsequently hit us back in the economy, and Canada will go down in relativity to the rest of the world. So if we increase our education rates and we increase the knowledge of our students, whether or not it is as we were talking about before, making sure that they conform to what each student has in their own individual learning, but we need to make sure that our students know and our government knows that we have to be competitive with our nation.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you guys, now that we're on the topic of collaboration and a competition, do you guys feel that with the current teacher strike that they're fighting for themselves or their students?
I believe they're fighting for themselves completely. I think that when you get a job in the public sector, there are certain rights which you just inherently relinquish in service of the public sector. So for example, the strikes, that's highly irresponsible. You're supposed to be teaching and educating the next generation, but you think that you can abstain from work. I don't think that is appropriate. Like that is your job when you're in the public sector. I don't think that is something that you are entitled to, per se. So the right to strike. It's
called public service for a reason.
Exactly. You're serving the public. And I completely can understand why the government wants to prevent teachers from being able to strike.
I disagree on that point because while it's true they are serving the public, everyone, I think this is a non-negotiable, that everyone should have their these basic rights, like the right to strike. My parents are in the airline industry. That's considered an essential service, just as public school is considered an essential service. Their right to strike was relinquished, and as a result, they have been forced into a mediocre deal, just as these teachers they have no choice. It's like what other kind of sector would allow that?
The government does not have the economical means to provide raises for teachers or provide care for students as teachers go on strike. We have no economic
teachers already have great benefits. I mean, just look at the teaching profession. It's something that you don't necessarily have to strive for day one. You can back down to the teaching profession after not reaching your goals in, say, the private sector. And then they get summers, they get all these vacations, and they want to be able to strike and prove to be a detriment to the students. They're supposed to be emissaries of behavior. When you're teaching the future generation, there's an onus that you need to be responsible, extra responsible, so that you can foster this behavior in the future generation. It's extremely irresponsible for them to set that type of message for kids.
First of all, I'd like to clarify for viewers outside of Ontario, this is teachers' conflict with the government going on in Ontario. We'll post some links to it. And secondly, I'd like to say that I'm sort of conflicted on this issue. While I think that striking in the public sector is a bit irresponsible, I disagree. I don't think this bill should have been brought up in the first place. I think it diminishes the rights of unions And like, I think we should, if collective bargaining is allowed in the first place, I think that it would ultimately, like...
But unions are a good idea where you have a few rotten apples that spoil the bunch, because though unions protect workers, and that was their underlying point, and they are good for doing that, at the same time, they can also foster lazy workers. I'm protected by the union, and so I don't have to give 100% because I will remain employed.
This bill was passed as a political ploy. I'm going to say that right now. The Liberal government did not have a majority by a couple of seats. All right, they needed to appeal to conservative voters when by-elections came around. So by passing this bill, they appeased the conservative voters. They ended up losing those by-elections, and now they're stuck in a hard place because they destroyed. It's political suicide. But if they had won those seats, then they would have repealed this bill, and everything would have been fine. But we didn't have that. So when we have that, it's not that the government, I don't believe, wanted to put teachers in this position or make this into a big, huge fiasco. I think it was a political ploy that went sour.
So just on that point, I think that it's sort of a trend in recent years to eliminate rights of unions. I mean, you have the teachers in the states. I forget which state it was, maybe Michigan or I don't know, where the governor put in place legislation called the Right to Work, and there's been several union deals or like union diminishing rights throughout Canada through the past few years as well. But also, I agree with Wes that unions need to be, like, they can be ruined by a few rotten apples, per se, and I think that we need to sort of make them into more sort of, there's three different types of political party. There's mass political party, which is, it's sort of like, it's sort of a grassroots sort of political party. Cadre, which is controlled by a central group of elites, and then there's one that's based on personality. I think unions need to sort of really switch to mass, sort of the mass political model.
I think that the onus should not be on the teachers per se, as it should be on the government. I agree with the unions. They're both good and bad. They're good in theory, but oftentimes they are bad in actual practice. But I think that if the Liberal government at this point, if they were serious about putting students first, because I think it's the government that should be serious about putting students first, they would realize two things, and that one is that maybe they need to change their one-size-fits-all approach to learning, and find ways of teaching children, that to think collaboratively and innovatively. But two, I think teachers should be they should be honored. They shouldn't have their rights cast aside, and that means putting in place a more competitive process for teachers. I totally agree with that. Because they do get a lot of benefits, but they're raising, the teachers are raising, the thinkers of tomorrow, so they need to be really top notch.
I think before we do that, we need to have a huge transformation of the educational institutes, because, like, I mean, we can't really reward people for staying at the status quo that was developed in the industrial revolution.
As what Lane said, as for rewarding teachers, I'm all for that, but I'm for rewarding good teachers, not just teachers. And so for them to want more without giving more, I find that completely asinine. I mean, if they shouldn't get a salary increase unless they're giving a performance increase. They shouldn't see more benefits unless they're giving a performance increase as well. And so, I don't know, I almost feel as though there's a sense of entitlement with the teachers. They're not the only ones with hard jobs. I mean, you hear them complain lots on, well, I'm teaching younger students, I need my breaks and stuff. They're not the only ones with hard jobs.
People are being laid off across the country.
Exactly. And they have a fairly stable career with great benefits and pretty decent pay. And so this sense of want, when they're not providing anything extra, I don't know how they can have that sort of sense of entitlement.
I agree. It's they want it, and there's all taken. There's no give.
Exactly.
To this, I agree.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have today. But I would like to thank you guys all for